Right, good evening. We're going to talk about the comparing Shavuot Tammuz and Tisha B'av. We're just coming to Tisha B'av now, and Shavuot Tammuz is definitely not as severe fast as Tisha B'av, and Shavuot Tammuz on the one hand it corresponds. It reminds us of the first thing in history was the Egel, when the Egel Azav, the golden calf, and then there were subsequent other events that tie into that, or were the breaching of the wall. It was the beginning of the Churban. It's a fast day, like a regular fast day. It starts in the morning. It doesn't have the same severity as Tisha B'av. Tisha B'av, on the other hand, is a much more severe fast day. It's almost like Yom Kippur, basically, and it's a day of mourning, of crying. It's much worse, and it commemorates the first event it commemorates was when the Meraglim came back, and we cried that we don't want to go into Eretz Canaan, and Vayivchu Balayla, they cried on that night, and Hashem said, you cried that night for nothing. I'm going to make a day of crying forever. For the generations until Latid Lavo. It's much harsher, much worse. It's a day of crying. It doesn't seem to be so if we compare the two sins, let's just compare those two sins. So we're talking about worshipping the Egel, and not wanting to go into Eretz Israel. Crying about not going to Israel because some who said that we're scared. The inhabitants are too mighty, they're too strong. Others said we should go back to Mitzrayim. There were various different things that they said. They didn't want to go to Israel. Which of those two would be considered the worst? Which is the worst Avera? When you think about it, when you put them next to each other, which is the worst one? What would you say?
It depends how much you add.
How much you add?
Yeah.
Just as Averot. I mean, there's Egel, worshipping the Egel, and not wanting to go into Eretz Israel. So seemingly the worshipping the Egel, which was Avodah Zarah, sorry, Egel is Avodah Zarah. It was worshipping idols. It was, or maybe you could say it was Israel Avodah Zarah. It wasn't quite worshipping idols. Whatever, there was certain kavanot, but then it seems something like Avodah Zarah. And not going to Eretz Israel, what actual Averah did they do? There's different explanations about what they did wrong and what the Meraglim did wrong. And the Meraglim seemed to just do what they were told to do. What did the people do wrong? And they cried. So they cried for nothing, and we will fix on that day, a day that constantly turns upon us, that becomes a source of mourning, of bloodshed, of destruction for generations. So from the outcome, from the reaction to it, it seems that what happened on Tisha B'av what happened on that night was much, much worse, whereas than what they did when they did Egel. But the actual, when you put the two next to each other, they don't seem, the Egel seems much worse at first glance. Right? So that's really what we want to try to explain. What is so terrible about what they did on the night of Tisha B'av, and in comparison to the Egel? So you have in the Klalot in Bechukotai, when it talks about Hashem's talking about if you do the brachot, if you do everything, if you do Hashem's will, and you keep the Torah mitzvot, and everything's going well, and you're going to have all these lovely things happen, you're going to have children upon Asa, and everything's going to go right, and there's all these kind of brachot, and the enemies are going to be kept away, and you're going to be strong. And then it says at the end there, "V'lo tigal nafshi etchem." My son, Hashem says, I won't revolt you, I won't reject you, which is hard to understand. You just said that all these lovely things are going to happen, and you say, and I won't reject you. I won't. Well, of course you won't. It's an interesting explanation. Lo tigal nafshi etchem. We try to explain what that means exactly. When in the Tehillim, when David HaMelech is describing what they did wrong, what happened with the Meraglim, he uses an expression. He says, "Vayim asu be'eretz chemda." They despised. They were revolted. They turned away from a land of eretz chemda, a land that you desire, a land of desire. So there's a couple of points here. So first of all, what they did is Vayim Asu, they despised it, and Eretz Yisrael is described as Eretz Chemda, a land of desire. So that's very interesting description. And what does it mean Vayim Asu? What is Mi'us? What does it mean to Mi'us? Where do we find Mi'us to reject, to despise? So we had it actually. We learned on Shabbos. If you remember, we had with when the example was given in the Midrash Shmuel. The Midrash in Shmuel talks about it, that when the people wanted to appoint a king, and the leader was Shmuel up to then, and Hashem said, and Shmuel was upset that he says that they've rejected my leadership and they want to have a king now. And Hashem comes to him and says, no, don't think it's you they're rejecting. Oti ma'asu, they're rejecting me. They're despising me. It's me, Hashem, they're despising. So there's various explanations of why they were exactly despising Hashem. But despising here means that they don't have any interest. They're rejecting it. It's something that we don't want to have any connection to. We've lost our connection with Hashem. That's what Hashem was saying. That's mi'us. The opposite of mi'us would be the Malbim says the opposite of mi'us is bakasha. Is to want something, to try and get something, to desire that. Whereas mi'us is that you're just not interested in it, not interested. You can have just an example. You could have someone who's let's say two people who could get on, let's say, and then there's some issue between them. They set up a shop next to each other, and one guy's furious with the other one for selling stuff right next to where he's selling it. So he's upset. Or you could have an example I thought of is you could have a fruit that's nice. So you want to eat a delicious fruit, but then there's maybe some pips in it, or there's thorns around it, like a sap, there's thorns around it. So you've got on the one hand some connection, some interest in it, and then there's something that's putting you off, something that's a problem. So the Malbim says that's called the difference between an ohev, someone that you like, and an oyev, someone that's against you. An oyev will be that an enemy would be that you could have connection with them, but you've got some issue that's stopping between the two of you. So, or there's a fruit you want to eat and there's something in the way. There's a problem. There's an oyev as opposed to an ohev. Whereas mi'us is where you have a person who's just got no interest in talking to, no interest in having any connection to. It's like the kid imagine a kid that people fight with and people don't get on with him, and he argues there, and then they make up. So that's like a constant friction. So that kid has a hard time in school, but he kind of finds people to be friendly with, and then he fights with other people, and he's maybe is not the most liked person, but he kind of gets on. You can have another kid imagine a kid that nobody goes near. It's just like an outcast. Like as soon as he comes and sits down, everyone moves away, right? A kid that's just like a nebuch, that nobody wants to go near him. He's just like a freak. So that kid is like it's much worse. He's got a much more serious problem. It's a kid that's going to want to commit suicide or something. I mean, he's just a kid that's got no one wants to go near him. That's like it's called. He's ma'us. He's like the people just don't want to have anything to do with him. Whereas somebody who there's always friction with is someone there's connection to, there's friction with. So there you have, that's ohev and oyev as opposed to mi'us and bakasha. The Midrash says that when it talks about that Midrash about when the people came to came to Shmuel and they said we want a king. So the Lashon there, I think the Midrash says, Rabbi Dov says, Hashem says, Ki gam oti ma'asu. He says, not just you, Shmuel, they've rejected or they've despised. Ki gam oti. And the Rabbi Dov says, it's like a drasha. He says, not just ma'asu, ki one, gam oti, three things. They are mo'es in three things. They've rejected three things. And what are those three things? He says, it's malchut shamayim, they've against Hashem, malchut bet David. They've rejected the concept of Bet David, of having a king in the world that will bring the kavod of Hashem. So they've asked for a king, but what they're actually asking for, this is before David, this is before Shaul. They've asked for a king, but what they want is a king who will be like a regular, a non-Jewish king. They want a king, Kol HaGoyim. They don't want Malchut Bet David, so they've rejected Malchut Shamayim, they rejected the concept Malchut Bet David, and that's why you'll find Shmuel tells them off in a huge rebuke there. And he says they've rejected Binyan Bet HaMikdash. They don't want Binyan Bet HaMikdash. Meaning that they don't want the Kavod of Shamayim, the Kavod of Shekhinah in this world. That's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Ki Gam Oti Ma'asu, they've rejected three things. He says, he carries on, I think the Midrash says, Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya says, there's no shefa bracha in the world until they mevakesh those three things again. We won't rectify it. There's no tikkun for this until we mevakesh these three things. That meaning that mius means that we're not interested. We're not interested in this thing. There's no connection. We don't want it, and we have to be mevakesh. We have to want it. What they were doing. What they were doing with the Chet HaMeraglim when we came back and we said we don't. When they came back and we said we don't want them. We're crying, and it was a bichiyah shel chinam. It was a crying for nothing. So what they were doing is they were crying. They were showing that we just don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. We don't want it. It's a land that you should want, you should desire, and it's a land when you're in it you desire a connection to Hashem. And by rejecting it, by saying we're not interested in it, then it was a far more fundamental rejection of Hashem. It wasn't. It might be, if you put it on paper, is it a worse sin than the Egel? It could be. It isn't the worst thing. The Egel is a fundamental. It's saying that we don't believe in Hashem to a certain degree, or it's a chisaron in emunah. It's avodah zarah. But at the end of the day, if a person is keeping Torah, then he does avodah zarah. So it's a terrible sin. But he hasn't rejected a connection to Hashem. Whereas here they were saying we don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is full of mitzvot. Eretz Yisrael is the palace of Hashem. If you look at all the place it talks about Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara that talks about Eretz Yisrael, you know where the sugya is. The sugya about Eretz Yisrael that talks about how great Eretz Yisrael is, and it talks about how we in Latid Lavo the trees will have gluskiot yafot, that will have cakes on them ready to eat, as if the land. He talks about Latid Lavo, what will be in Eretz Yisrael. That's all in the Gemara. It's in Sugya and Ketubot. It's all in Ketubot, right? That's all in Ketubot. And the famous rule from Rav Tzadok says, a famous rule, that every Gemara, every Agadata in Shas is connected, is put in the Masechet that's connected to the Agadata it's talking about. So if you, for example, now, what's the Gemara that we learn, the people who are allowed to learn on Tisha B'av, is the Gemara about the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and the story about destruction of Beit HaMikdash, how it all came about, and about Titus, and about it having a fly in his head, and all this. All these Agadatas are all in which Gemara? Remember where it is? In Gittin. It's all in Gittin, right? Now Gittin, a get is a kritut, is a cutting, a severing of a connection, right? So in the Gemara, Gittin is a place where you put all the things about Churban Abayit, the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, and so on and so forth. Every Agadata, basically, every Agadata connects to the Gemara that it's talking about. The Gemara that talks about Eretz Yisrael is Ketubot. It's a Gemara Ketubot. The Ketubah is a union, is a joining, is a marriage, and that's the marriage, is a Ketubah, and that's what you should be when you're the Bnei Yisrael coming in. Us being in Eretz Yisrael is being in the land, being in the house of Hashem, being married as if to Hashem, being connected. And by Yimasu Eretz Chemda, they rejected Eretz Chemda. We don't really have any cheshek for it. We can't really bother. We don't want this. We should go back to Mitzrayim, where we've got no she'achalnu chinam. We ate without responsibility, without chiyuv of mitzvot, without connection to Hashem. So that's what they were rejecting. If you look in Eicha it says at the end of Eicha, it's interesting. If you look at the wording, if you've got,
did everyone cry?
The pasuk, the lashon of the pasuk is vayivku kol Beit Yisrael. It says the pasuk says, if you look at the pasuk in Shlach, if you look at the pasuk in Shlach Lecha, it says it's quite
because we know with the Egel that not everyone did it. So you had.
Yeah, the Egel was less, right? It was only 3,000. Yes.
It's like there's hope for the nation. But with
right.
this,
but here,
everyone did it.
Yeah. ותישא כל העדה, ויתנו את קולם. The whole עדה, ויבכו העם בלילה ההוא. So כל העדה, it says. It sounds like everyone, yeah. כל העדה. So they cried on that night. And if you look in Echa, it says, the end of Echa is quite difficult to understand because we always, whenever we read Echa, we say, Ki amaltu nosanu, kasabtanu meod. That's the last passage. Then we go back and say, Ashiveinu Hashem elecha v'nashuva, Hashem ekegedem, as if to finish off with something nice, right? So the Echa finishes on quite a bad note because it finishes off saying, Atal shonu olam tamod. It finishes, the last part is like this, Al zed hayad avali benu. This, our heart was upset, was low. Al elech hashechu enenu, for this our eyes were darkened. Al har Sion sheshamem shualim hilchu ba, that the land of the Har Sion where the Shekhinah was, the foxes are walking there. So there's a complete desecration of the Shekhinah, a complete rejection of the Shekhinah. Ata Hashem le'olam teshed kisachal ledor vador. You Hashem, your kiseh, your kavod is always is eternal, even though we can't see it. Lama nanetzach tishkachenu. Why forget us forever? Ta'azvenu la'orech yamim. You've left us for good for such a long time. If you know, it goes in halves. It goes. It goes in each pasuk has two phrases in it, and they correspond. And it says, "What? Don't leave us forever. Bring us back, Hashem, and we will come back. Renew our days like before. Let us go back to how we were." That's quite a positive, hopeful ending. And then it finishes off, "Ki im ma'os me'astanu." For if you have despised us, if you have mo'es, right? Vayim asu. If you have been mo'es us, kasavta alenu ad me'od. You've been furious with us. So it's as if to say, don't give up on us. Still, we should do teshuvah, and that's it. Where we go back and we say, so this ending is the Gemara, the Midrash. I think it's actually Midrash in Shmuel. There says that if you have, what's happening here? There's two things. There's two opposites. It's not that you've despised us and therefore you've punished us, but it's two different things here. Midrash says that there's two things. There's two possibilities. If you're mo'es us, if you're repulsed, you've lost interest in us, as we've been explaining, you don't have any interest in us anymore, then we're finished. There's no good. We're not your nation anymore. You're mo'es. Like if we're mo'es in Eretz Chemda, we're mo'es in Eretz Yisrael, we're mo'es in Hashem, ki moti ma'asu, means we don't have any interest, we've lost interest, no chesed, we can't be bothered. So if Hashem is mo'es, then we've got no chance. But if he's mo'es, then Hashem doesn't punish us. He doesn't need to punish us. He doesn't need to be furious with us. There's nothing. He doesn't care. It's the kid it's not the kid that was bullied in school. It's not the kid everyone fights with. It's the kid that no one goes near. It's not the person that you argue with and you're furious. You want to speak to him and tell him and put him right, and he's so wrong. It's the person that you can't be bothered. The person you don't go near. It's the person you don't argue with. They say that. If you have a couple that fight, if you have a couple that argue, they can go to counselling and they can make up. If you have a couple that don't have any interest in each other, they're just not interested. So what's there to argue about? What's there to counsel about? You're trying to make them interested and not interested. There's nothing there. That's much worse. The Navi is saying something quite positive. He's saying, have you really despised us? Have you rejected us? Have you lost interest in us? You've been exceedingly furious with us. And we can see from that it's not that you're mo'es us, it's not me'isa, it's not ma'os ma'astanu, it's katzafta aleinu ad me'od. And therefore there's a chance that we can do teshuvah. That's what the Navi is saying. So and that's really what we did wrong, that the depth of the Averah that we did the severity was not so much whether it was bad Avirah and ranks of Avirah. It was a lack of interest completely in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for that, Hashem says, that's a bechiyah shel chinam. That's an empty bechiyah. It means a bechiyah of no interest. We're crying that we don't want to be close to Hashem. Hashem says, if that's the case, then the whole basis is gone. That you're now a nation that needs to, the calamities will come because you're gone. And that's what we have to work on. Well, how do we rectify that? How do we rectify that? What do we do? So you were going to ask something? How do we rectify that? What do we do if we're not interested? We're not interested. The one of the ways I heard is that we have this problem nowadays as well. I don't know if we're more interested in the generation that in the desert that cried. Do we have fulfillment more? Do we really want the Avodat Hashem? The way to one of the reasons why we don't feel a tshukah for it, why we don't look for it, is because our hearts, our minds are filled with all other things. We are interested in all other places. So Hashem has brought us into Galut. And if we free ourselves, if we realise that all these other things that we can look for, all other aspirations of being close to the non-Jews, gaining favour in their eyes, doing well, excelling in all kinds of other areas, if we can realise that they're pointless, then we will have when we'll have a tshukah, bakasha, we'll want to come close to Hashem. This is what Hashem did by putting us into Galut. Ma'os me'astanu, he says, you rejected me. It was an emptiness about your reaction. And what I've done is I'm going to put you through Galut eventually, where the exile will cause that everything you hoped would work out, everything you hoped you had your aspirations in, will all be shown up to be false. Every time you try and be part of one community, you try and do things like the non-Jews, they turn on you and they expel you or they persecute you. And you'll realise that the only true bakasha that I should have is to come close to Hashem. And that's why it says, if you asked at the beginning, in the Klalot it says, everything will be going well, meaning Hashem says, I won't feel that I'm uninterested in you, I'll be interested in you. That's the most basic connection to Hashem. It's all very nice doing the mitzvot and bringing bracha and everything, but the most basic connection and the biggest bracha is that Hashem says, I am the one, I want you, I want to be connected to you, I have a desire to be connected to you. And that's what it says. If you look in the Klalot there, it says after all the Klalot happen and all these bad things come to you, those that are left, and then it says, I will go with you, Bekeri, and there will be punishment after punishment. And it says, it says in the Pasuk, Misham, from there, you're going to seek HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From the depths of the Galut, you're going to see Bikashtem et Hashem Elokechem. You're going to request at Hashem. The point that Hashem wants, what the purpose of the Galut, the purpose of all this crying, of all the destruction that we have, is that that we will come to the feeling that we want to be close to Hashem. We'll realise everything else is pointless, and we'll say that we'll click into the right mode, that we'll realise we want connection to Hashem. That's the purpose there. And then we'll be able to go, we'll be in Eretz Chemda, we'll be in the land. And therefore we'll go back to the situation where you've chosen us from all the nations. Why has Hashem chosen us? We don't know. Why does Hashem choose the Torah? We don't know. Why does Hashem want good? We don't know these things. It's called the Ratzon of Hashem, the Chemda. It's the Chefetz Hashem. It's Eretz Chefetz. It's just His inner will, inner desire. When we have an inner will and inner desire to be close to Hashem, then we will be His nation. If you look through Shir HaShirim, in Shir HaShirim you have everything. The Shir HaShirim is talking about the connection between Hashem and us, right? And it's really the opposite of Eicha, right? Shir HaShirim is like the opposite of Eicha. Yet, if you look in Perek Hey, it's all talking about Nida Dodi, it's all beautiful, all the connection, the love between us. And there's a point in Perek Hey where it says at the beginning of Perek Hey, Bati legani achoti kala, I've come to my garden and my sister, my beloved, my bride. Ariti morim besamim, I've smelt these besamim, achati avdishir sheti nim chalavi, I've drank the wine. Ichlu re'im, drink, bisataf, lovely, it's all beautiful. Right? And that was really Hashem saying, I want to be close to you. But then it says, the next pasuk says, Ani yeshena v'li bi'er, I'm asleep. This was a downward point. Rashi says, there's a Rashi here, Rashi says...
Isn't the translation, it says the translations according to Rashi.
Oh, yeah? No, the wording of Rashi is very good. Get the Rashi in a second. Let me read you the words of Rashi. Rashi says like this: Ani shena kishayiti shalva v'shketa b'bayit rishon, when I was tranquil, quiet in the first Beit HaMikdash, no'ashti me'avod HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I was no'ashti. I just couldn't be bothered. I lost interest in serving Hashem. Yeah, this is to say, ki yeshena v'nirdemet, like someone who's asleep and dozing. My avodat Hashem wasn't vibrant, wasn't alive, wasn't awake. Couldn't be bothered.
He was speaking that.
Pardon?
He was saying that.
Rashi says this. He on Shir Hashirim, the pasuk in Shir Hashirim says, "Ani yeshena v'li bi'er." Even after it's spoken about how close to Hashem, how bati legani, I've come to the garden, everything's beautiful, everything's close. That was by Rishon. But then there was a problem. Ani yeshena. I suddenly fell asleep. I got dozy. I got uninterested.
I thought with the first bias, I thought there was a proper vodka there.
Yes, but then towards the end, it was Avodah Zarah, and it was destroyed. So here you see, it's interesting from this Rashi that we understand that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, first because they did Avodah Zarah, they did the three cardinal sins, and Me'ul Shlita. Rashi here is saying that No'ashti me'avod HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I lost vibrance, I lost interest, it wasn't a chefet, it was a mius in the service of Hashem. What Rashi is saying is that this sleepiness, this doziness, this yeshena, Ani Shena in the Beit Rishon, that's what brought event to doing the Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is only, you do these Averot Chamurot because you've lost interest in Avodah Hashem. If they would still have the vibrance of Avodah Hashem, it would never have touched Avodah Zarah. The end Averot that they did was those Averot, but the underlying problem was No'ashti me'avodah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there it says, but Hashem tries. Hashem says, I apologize. Then the Mahalach, how do we get Hashem destroy the Beit HaMikdash, and we were thrown out, we were distanced from Hashem, then we have to be the ones to knock on the door. We have to be, he sends the Nevi'im to warn us, and we didn't leave. What happens? Kol Dodi Dofek, the Nevi'im come and try to warn us, they come and knock on the door, and we say, Pashati Kutonti, I can't be bothered. The Pasuk represents a person who's just kind of in bed and he can't be bothered getting out and he can't bother getting dressed. Pashati Kutonti, I've taken all my clothes already. He just can't be bothered. That's the way it's saying. That's the point. He doesn't feel interest in it. He doesn't feel interest in Avodat Hashem. So this was the root here. This is the root of why the Beit Rishon was destroyed, and that's really the root of why we were punished. What the sin was for not wanting to go into Eretz Israel, and it's a problem far deeper than doing a particular avera, doing avodah zarah. It's a problem far deeper. It's a lack of it. You've been presented with the opportunity to connect to Hashem, and I don't see the interest in it. I don't feel like it. That's a far deeper problem. And the B'ezrat Hashem will be able to renew it. So how do we renew it? The way we renew it is by rejecting other when we don't have other things to when other things are filling our stomach as if then we're not hungry for Avodat Hashem. when we're hungry, when our stomachs are empty of all the other pursuits around, then we get hungry for Avodat Hashem. Then we have the opportunity to be hungry for Avodat Hashem, and then we have a chemda, we have a ratzon, and that Avodat Hashem we should grow that will to serve Hashem, and we should have see soon the coming back to Eretz Yisrael and the binyan Beit Hamikdash.
Stop raining.